Let's see if we're okay. We are rolling. My name is Monk Rowe for the Phillies Jazz Archive, and I am very pleased to have Lisa Parrott with me. I'll say this evening, she's morning, and it occurred to me that time-wise, I would just about be walking on stage for a gig, and you'd just about be waking up the next morning after a gig.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
For the people who view this, I'll mention that you're New York based, but perhaps you can tell us about your current situation or predicament.
Yes. Sorry, I'm just muting things here. Sorry. I've got to do that
As
before I
I
start.
will.
Yes. Okay, so yes, I live and I'm based in Brooklyn, New York, and have been for since, well, I've been in New York since the mid 90s. But at the moment, I'm actually in a mandatory hotel quarantine in Sydney, Australia, so I can hang out with mum and dad. And they've had that in place in Australia for COVID-19 restrictions. Everybody who comes in, and only returning Australians, because I'm a dual citizen, I'm allowed to come in, but I'm also able to leave. If you're a resident of another country, you're not allowed in, and Australians aren't allowed out. That's how intense it is. I feel very grateful that I'm actually going to that I'm doing this. And, I've had to take a million different COVID tests to even get to this point. And I've been vaccinated, but that doesn't even mean anything. But anyway, I'm in Sydney and I'm halfway through quarantine.
Will you be able to hook up with any of the musicians that you played with during your formative years?
I was just texting. I'm having a rehearsal. Like literally, I'm going from here to a rehearsal, which I'm very excited about. The stars have aligned in that they're both available that day. So I'm going to go from here to rehearsing with two friends that I've been playing with since 1988.
Wow.
So, which is, yeah, we have a gig a week Friday in Sydney, then I have a gig in my hometown of Newcastle, which is where mum and dad are, and then a gig later in the month back in Sydney.
Speaking of mom and
July. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, okay. Speaking of mom and dad, I wondered how they felt or how they feel about both their daughters, your sister Nikki, going way across the pond to pursue a life as musicians.
Exactly. I'm the older sister, so it's my fault, obviously. And both Nikki and I came sort of a year apart. We both got grants from the Australian government to do some private study here. So we actually came separately. And oh my gosh, it's been a massive adjustment, I have to say, for mum and dad. It's hard, but we both visit regularly, and mum and dad mum's been about half a dozen times. Dad, I think, has made about more than a dozen trips to New York. Yeah, mum hates the long travel, so mum's like, you have to come and visit. You have to come here. But they're 79 and 81 now, so I don't want them doing long travel. Yeah.
Were they musical? I'm sorry, were they musical?
No, but music is on always in the house. Music lovers. I think mum learned piano as a kid, but me and Nikki both went to a musical elementary school, and we started learning music in school, but also started private lessons on piano. And Nikki learned flute, and I learned clarinet, all classical. So still, when you go to mum and dad's place, the classical music station and jazz music station radio stations are on. like all the time. So there's music always on in the house. So music lovers, yes.
Well, we thank them for that.
Yes.
And is that where you heard Sidney Bechet?
Aha. No, that's actually a neighbor who still lives across the street from mum and dad. His name is Harry Cantle. He's a trad jazz bass player. I'm not sure if, I don't think he plays anymore. I was babysitting his kids, and he gave me a Sidney Bechet cassette tape. I think I was about 14 or 15. I think I was 15. And I just fell in love with jazz. That was my first real listen to jazz. I just fell in love with it. And that's what started it all, actually. Have you heard the story about the 3-string bass?
I have not. But can I ask first, if you recall, when you first heard Sidney Bechet, was he playing the clarinet or the soprano?
It was a tape with both, but what's in my head is soprano saxophone, actually. Even though I was playing clarinet, I'd started dabbling a little bit on. No, it was actually after I heard Sidney Bechet that I started playing a little bit of saxophone at school, and I can't remember what age. I was a tenor and soprano player first. I'm trying to remember. I probably was, when I got my first tenor my first saxophone, I was probably 16 or 17. 16, I'd say. Yeah.
And the 3-string bass?
The 3-string bass. So Harry, the bass player, who gave me that Sidney Bechet tape, he played bass, and because I was like, okay, this is it. We already had a little busking group together. And I'm like, okay, Nikki, you can't play flute in my group. You have to play tuba or bass if you want to be in my jazz group. I was forming a jazz group. And there was a double bass that had no bridge or any strings or anything in the school closet at the high school, in the closet at the high school. We brought it home. Harry put 3 strings on it and a bridge. And I think, according to Nikki, like, he shaved too much off the bridge and the strings were sort of hitting the fingerboard. But he said his theory was you can't hear the E string anyway. So there was no point having an E string. So he always played a 3-string bass. So for the first couple of months, Nikki was playing an 3-string bass until we went to a music camp where someone put an E string on the bass for her.
I love those little anecdotes.
Yeah, you can't hear the E string anyway.
Yeah. There's so many things that happen to young musicians along the way up, and I think busking and I was reading your bios and things that on your website, and it sounds like you were in and out of a number of bands, and there's a lot of education that goes on in that.
Yeah. I met some musicians. I was 17 at a jazz camp. I went to a classical camp, found out about a jazz camp. So in the next school holidays, went to that jazz camp. And that's where the first proper, like, modern jazz group that me and Andrew Dickerson, who's a drummer who teaches at Sydney Conservatorium, all of us are still playing. It was Adrian Mears on trombone, who's based in Europe. Nikki on bass, and John Foreman on piano, who's actually got the Order of Australia, who's done things like Australian Idol and all sorts of stuff. He was on TV and stuff like that. So we formed in Newcastle, Australia, which is 100 miles north of Sydney. We formed our first band, and that was together for a couple of years. And at the same time, I after high school did like a year and a bit of a classical music course before we all moved to Sydney, and I started doing the jazz course at Sydney Conservatorium.
Do you recall what you got paid the first time you did a paying gig?
Well, it wasn't jazz. It was a little busking group. I'm pretty sure it was $10 each for Coal Point School Fete. I do remember the group Blues by Five. We had a couple of regular gigs. So I was the oldest at 17. Um, and that was $40. That was $40 a gig. Not bad. And that was at the Grand Hotel. Bizarrely enough, on July 6th, I'm playing in the exact same. I'm playing at the Grand Hotel. Oh, that was Rumours Tavern. But anyway, we had also a regular gig at the Grand Hotel. And fast forward however many years that is, I'm playing there on July 6th.
I assume you're going to let the audience know that.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
In those kind of gigs, this would have been around what year?
From about, that band was formed in 85, so 85 to 88.
So in your choice of tunes, was there a balance between what you all wanted to play and what you felt maybe what we need to play?
The drummer, Andrew, had a massive vinyl collection. Now, records in Australia were really expensive. A secondhand record was $15. So I never had a big vinyl collection. So I had cassette tapes of people's stuff, but he did. It seemed like always the rhythm section, people could afford the albums, and all the horn players, we were like listening to the rhythm section's albums. Monk, Miles, just all classic modern jazz stuff. So we did a ton of like, you know, of Miles sort of stuff. So it was a mix of like a lot of standards and just, you know, modern jazz tunes, bebop. I was playing tenor and soprano, although I had an alto, which is the exact same alto that's still in that room. It's still my main horn. Yeah, and right before I moved to Sydney, before we all moved to Sydney, my I'd gotten a Mark 6 that I'd come into a Mark 6 in my hometown, but it's got squashed by a speaker at a gig. And I became an alto player after that.
You know, I love that because you could form a question like, was it the higher pitch that just spoke to you that you wanted to go to the E-flat horn? No, my horn got squashed.
Well, to be honest, I still think my most natural horn is the soprano saxophone, which is the horn I probably play the least. But I love playing it, and there are a couple of groups I'm playing where I play baritone and soprano saxophone, just like say John Sermon, like that sort of, you know, he sounds amazing on both of those instruments. Yeah, I still think it's probably because I grew up playing clarinet. It's the same register as the clarinet. That's my theory.
Yeah, it's a little easier to get on the plane too.
Yeah, well, that's true.
So there was a point, obviously you went to the conservatory and you had decided that my career is in music at that point.
Yeah. Oh, I decided that at about 15 when Nikki and I were in a local marching band. And I decided this is what I'm good at. This is what I want to keep doing. Yeah, it was called the Marching Koalas. It was 120 kids, the first American-style marching band in Australia, and they're still going. Me and Nikki were in the original group. We marched at Disneyland in the Tournament of the Roses parade in '83.
Now that's some traveling for a gig.
Yes, yeah, we spent 2 weeks in LA. That was definitely like, okay, I want to keep doing music.
I spoke recently with Adrian Cunningham, and his opinion was that Australia has, I'm trying to remember his exact words, but basically he said Australia does not have any indigenous music of its own. How do you feel about that statement?
Um, well, Aboriginal people have been playing music for 50,000 years in Australia.
He did mention that. I should have said that. I think that was his exception to what he was thinking. He was talking more about, I believe, like the pop music and jazz, and has been fashioned after music from somewhere else.
Yes, yes. I'm a lot older than Adrian, and um, I was fortunate enough to in the early 80s, I think it was 83 is when there started to be there was a jazz course formed at Sydney Conservatorium. So I was there only 5 years into that program. And Nikki was in the same year. Um, Also the bass player I'm going to be playing with on Friday. Um, and his name was Don Burrows. He only recently just passed away. An incredible clarinet, Barry. He got me on Barry. I owe him everything, actually. I owe my career to Don Burrows. He, he, um, so this was the year after my tenor got squashed. I was just a soprano player for a year, and um, he got me playing baritone in the baritone sax in the big band. He's like, I think you'd be great on it. I think you have an ear for that. Nikki's a bass player. You hear that. I think you'd be great on that. I was like, I don't want to carry something like that around, but he's like, go, just trust me on that. I want to put you in the big band on Barry. Um, Now he is someone who traveled, he was well known over here as well. He traveled all over Europe. He traveled to India, was very, and Brazil, and he took music from all sorts of parts of the world, including the States, and formed this jazz course. And at the time, the curriculum was very much based around learning standards as a way of learning improvisation. But but he was also incredibly encouraging to compose your own music. So those sort of guys, yes, I feel like there is an actual thing. There is an Australian quality about Australian jazz, and I feel like I'm a product of that because we're not as influenced by American jazz. So I feel like there's a lot of Australian jazz musicians who are very unique because it's so isolated. I feel like I came up with my own way of doing things because I was doing gigs from such a young age before I even went to the conservatorium. I was already playing gigs because I studied classical music and everything and had very good ears. And so I was already improvising. So I'd already came up with my own concept of how to do things. And my favorite Australian musicians are like that. And I think isolation breeds that. Case in point, someone like Don Burrows, but even more so, my hero of the saxophone is Bernie McGann. Bernie McGann, McGann, alto player who just was a total original. Been I think was on the scene starting in the late 50s, certainly early 60s. I don't even know how to describe him. You have to. There's not a lot of recordings because unfortunately the Australian jazz recording industry is definitely. There's not a lot of recordings of me early in my career at all either. It was sort of out of our reach financially and just not available to us. But Bernie McGann is just, he sounds a bit like Sonny Rollins on alto. Some people say he sounds a little bit of Ornette's sound, but he was already playing that way before he even heard someone like Ornette Coleman. So I do feel like Australia has bred some quite unique and original sounding musicians who have a different way of, it's influenced by American jazz, but yeah.
Do you think you could have made a living to your satisfaction if you had stayed in Sydney?
I already was, actually. I was a
Okay.
big fish in a small pond. I was doing the Australian Art Orchestra. I was doing a lot of very high profile projects. For me, it was about learning. I wanted to, I, at the age of 25, it's sort of is when 25 was when I left, and it's sort of, I look back on it now like, I can't believe I moved to the other side of the world, not knowing a single person. The only thing I had lined up was some lessons with Steve Coleman. That's who I had private lessons with. And then 4 years later, I also got another grant from the Australian government. I actually studied with Lee Konitz, and that was on Steve's suggestion. So to study with the older masters before they go.
In applying for the grant that made that possible, I'm guessing you had to verbalize or write on paper what was your intent? What is it that you were so intent on learning?
Well, specifically, uh, specifically, I didn't feel like I I was working on some sort of much more complex concepts at the time, in terms of different time signatures and different ways of which is why I studied with Steve Coleman. Like, just I wanted to, I needed to hang out with some people in a different realm, and I felt like that was, I felt like I'd stopped learning actually. So I'm not sure what I wanted to learn. I'm sort of a big part of the picture is like in 1988 was my first exposure to the music of Ornette Coleman, and that changed me forever after that. His melodic and harmolodic concepts have influenced everything I've played and have heard ever since. That's been a big deal to me. So I also wanted to go where more people were doing that sort of music as well.
I've been reading. I wish I was more familiar with Ornette and his concepts, but I've been reading about it. But much of it makes me scratch my head, I must admit. And so I'm going to take the opportunity to ask you to sort of explain some of it.
Well, Ornette too, from what I've read, and I did meet him a couple of times. I went to one of his birthday parties. That was amazing. That's from, I have a lot of stories. Through a friend of mine, Kenny Wessel, who a guitarist who played with him for quite a few years. But it seems like Ornette, every time you asked him, what is harmolodics? He would answer a different way. And me and my friends in Sydney came up with a way of what we thought, or what I thought harmolodics was. And for me, it was just a very basic concept of the harmony is formed by different melodies being played at the same time. And I've always been into the logic of melody, how it's almost like if you do it, think of it in terms of philosophy, if you have a statement here, for the music to run its true course, it has to go here, and it has to go here, and it has to go here. So following the natural logic of melody of one instrument and then layering that with another instrument, like that makes up the harmony, because there's no preset form. There are some recordings where Ornette did play over preset forms, namely his very first album, where he plays very freely over the blues and stuff like that. But later ones, they're not sticking to a form. You can tell what tune it is they're playing because it's also melody based. And that's where I'm coming from as well. It's all very much melody based, even though I've also been very much into different types of rhythms as well, not just 4/4 swing.
Was it a challenge to follow that thread with melodies and not be pulled into the standard, okay, I have 4 bars and 8 bars, and you're just naturally going there because of your life experience? Did you have to really consciously avoid that?
No, no, not really. Um, and for me, it was all about playing with other people and exploring. I say this, so therefore you say that, so therefore I say this. It just following natural logic. No, I didn't. In fact, I feel like when I play things without a form, I actually sound more inside than when I play on set forms, because I'm really using my ears and making music with another person. Like often, yeah, it sounds more inside than outside when I'm not using a set form. Does that make sense?
It does. Carl Berger said something that just made me pause. He said playing free requires much more organization and thought and like, wow, I never thought of that.
And I completely agree with that. I completely agree with that. And playing a lot of that way made me so much more freer when I'm playing over form. And I would also add that doing a lot of different time signatures, like my favorite time signature is 7. And I don't know, I just do games with myself. There was a time where I could pretty much sing or play every bebop head in 7. And I would learn tunes that I felt like I needed to learn, but I didn't really want to learn, but I'd learn it in 7 just to mess with myself, like Moose the Mooch, or so that doing that sort of stuff, you can imagine how that freed me up over 4/4. If I can be that comfortable in 7, I wasn't even doing it to be able to feel freer in 4/4. It just was me exploring being, and this was very much coming out of the lessons I had with Steve Coleman, getting my body feeling one thing, feeling different combinations of 2s and 3s, or he never said numbers, it was longs and shorts. That's going back to African rhythms, Bulgarian rhythms. A long is 3 and a short is 2. So short, short, long, short, short, long, short, short, long, short, short, long. And when you look at like dances in Bulgaria, there's a very old one that's 3/2/2. And it's funny, we think of what we call odd number times as being lumpy, not even, but that's not right. If you look at, there's a one that's 3, I know I've gone off on a tangent, but bear with me here. There's a Bulgarian rhythm that's 3/2/2. That's I don't know how many hundreds of years old it would be, but it's day da da day da da day da da day. So you can see that you pause on one side and you pause on the other. And when I saw that dance, I was performing it with a woman from Australia who studied in Bulgaria, and I was on this tour performing for kids in the outback. That was in 90, I don't know. And she was teaching them all how to dance in 7, and not saying that they were dancing in 7, just like it's this. And I just saw how, oh my God, it makes complete sense. That all of those, that music, if we look back at the old dances like Greek music or Bulgarian music, if you look back at the dances that go with that, they make the music makes complete sense. It went, the dance came first and then the music went with the dance.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. And I know I'm one of those people that always tries to make sense of things I hear, like gamelan music, and I try to put it in a context that it doesn't belong. And
Uh-huh.
then I get aggravated because I can't find one or something.
Right. Um, and then a lot of like West African music, they don't even have a concept of one. Like they don't think in numbers. And that's Steve Coleman was coming out of that concept. He used words like short and long, didn't use numbers. And I think that was extremely good for me because even though he's, I don't know, how can I explain this? Um, the times we hung out together, it wasn't really actually teacher student. We were just doing stuff together. Sometimes we were transcribing Bird together, and I'd be getting the melodic parts a lot quicker than him, and he would get the very technical, mathematical, if you want to use a, you know, he would get those parts sort of quicker, and so we were both learning from each other's like strengths. So um, I've lost my train of thought though. Sorry.
That's okay, because I'm going to jump in with a quote about one of your tunes called Gargoyle.
Oh.
Okay, it says Parrott borrows from a traditional 7/4 Bulgarian dance rhythm 3/2/2, composing a
Mm-hmm.
5-bar melody layered with West African style guitar melody in 5/8 as a 14-bar phrase, and thus creates an unusual sense of balance. I couldn't have said it better.
Yes, that's a quote of me explaining that tune. Yes.
Okay, well,
No, that's not
I
else.
suspected that when you started talking about all that. It's
Yeah.
very fascinating.
And even though that's me explaining it, but I'm still coming. If you listen to it, I seriously doubt you would hear it as just music that fits together. You wouldn't be thinking about, oh, what kind of signature or that. You know what I mean? Like it for me, it always has to have an organic feel, has to feel natural. There's no point. I'm not doing it for it to sound technical, for it to sound like something. My favorite musicians um, play very hard stuff that you don't even realize it's very hard stuff. They make it so natural. That's what I aim for as well. So some of these things have come out of me practicing weird things, and then I'll try to make music out of it. Um, that tune, to be honest, started a really, really, really long time ago, and it didn't become a tune until a couple of years ago. Um, the bass line was already there, and this other 5/8 thing was already there. I never could figure out a melody though. I didn't know how to get it to work together, and I ended up just improvising along with it and coming up with an improvised melody that I just loved over the top of it. But yeah, 5 bars of 7 fits over 7 bars of 5, and there is all that,
There's a little
So,
bit of
but
little
I
bit
try
of
to make it as natural as possible. I know that sounds crazy. You'd have to listen to the piece though.
okay. Well, you're directing me to a vaguely formed question, and also connected with. I believe this is a quote from Ornette Coleman. There is a music that has the quality to preserve life, and I wonder two things. What does music? What can music mean? And what do you hope an audience listening to your music will get out of it?
um, First of all, I'm tearing up because I relate so much to this, and especially since I've just come off the back of barely playing with anybody for almost a year and a half. And before I left on this trip in May, I finally played some duets at a little art gallery in Brooklyn with my friend Jamie Foxx. And we're both vaccinated, so we've both been getting together. He was the first person I didn't wear a mask around. We were both like, can we do this? I think we can. And then we actually played a gig for about 10 people, a little art gallery that opened up onto the side of a street with chairs on, it was a great little Brooklyn gig, but I will never forget that feeling. I was very surprised by it, that it had been a very long time since I felt that much joy in playing. So it was a really wonderful feeling to realize, in your head, this means a lot to you. You've made a career out of this, but at the same time, oh, wow, there's certain things you can't do if you're not playing for an audience. I mean, there's certain things you just don't sort of play. Rehearsing is not anything like performing. It really isn't. Because we went to places, musical places that we hadn't been to, and we just had massive smiles on our faces, and it was so joyful. And I just want to really remember that feeling of how important it is. And the audience were feeling it too. That was very obvious as well. Everyone was just very, very happy for the experience, but also, it was wonderful to have a dedicated listening audience. So that sort of feeling that I'm trying to describe is what I aim for, and I want to try to get each time I play, where there's such a deep connection with the musicians that the audience cannot help but be brought into that and also taken along for that experience. And I would hope that, I suppose, if my dad can come to one of my gigs where I'm playing heavy harmolodics, I'm saying that in inverted commas because, like, some of it, my was it 2 years ago or maybe 3 years ago? But one of my last times I was out here playing gigs, Harry, the bass player, came, and he was not expecting to like my music, and he was fascinated. He was like, I never listened to music like that, but I love that. Why? He was just, he's like, come over for wine and sourdough bread. I'm fascinated. Why did I like it? And I said, it's about melody, because I'm always coming from melody. So no matter how chaotic it might sort of sound, if you just pick apart the pieces, I always want to try to get a high form of, it's always coming from a loving melodic place. I feel like melody is love. I really do. So that's what I would hope an audience gets out of it, like love, I suppose.
I love that answer.
And I'm tearing up because it's, because of what's happened this year,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you get to New York for lessons. Had you intended to go back at that point to Australia?
So I came in 93 for 9 months and did study. I hadn't intended to come back at that end of 9 months. I had visa issues. It's a long story. I'm not going to go into. I was actually sort of forced out. That's a long story. We won't go there. And then I just saved up money, spent 1.5 years in Australia, and then came back permanently in 95. When I came back in 95, I knew, well, New York and the vibe in New York, I felt at home. I didn't feel like a freak, even though I had such great supportive musicians, and I discovered myself musically in Australia. Just culturally, New York supported someone like me. I felt like, and I wondered, because of my biggest hero being Bernie McGann, I used to sound a lot like, I think I still have a lot of Bernie in me. I went to every one of his gigs for a whole year when I first moved to Sydney. I was, he's playing about 3 times a week. It was fantastic. But I was wondering if the way I played was only valid in Australia. That's what I didn't know. It's like I'd gotten accolades for being an original voice in Australia. I didn't know whether it would work anywhere else. Yeah. So I remember going to like my first couple of jam sessions in the East Village, 93, and a couple of people coming up to me and giving me advice. And I was sort of taken aback because I wasn't really getting that in Australia. And I realized it was coming from a place of we like what you're doing, here's some advice. If someone just says, yeah, you sound great, that means nothing to you. But if someone's saying, hey, have you ever checked out such and such and such and such? I reckon you could, you could check that out, or something like that's what it was like. And also I realized, and I got my first gigs with Clifford Barbaro, a drummer, and we had a regular gig. And after doing it for like a month, I asked him, why did you pick me? I hear all these such great musicians everywhere. Why did you pick me to be in your band? He's like, well, you don't sound like anybody else. And that was the penny dropping for me. It's like, there's always room for another original voice in this music. And that's what's taken me as, that's giving me a career, actually, because I don't sound like anyone else. And it doesn't mean that I definitely have influences. You can hear some Ornette, you can hear Bernie McGann. On Barry, you can hear Jerry Mulligan. You can hear these influences, but at the same time, I feel like it was really great that when I was really young, I made up my own way of doing things.
This would be pure speculation.
Yeah.
But if you grew up now, if you were starting now,
Yeah.
where absolutely everything is available at the touch of the finger,
Yes.
I wonder if your playing would have turned out as original as it is.
It's possible not, because what I'm seeing from the times I've done some workshops, like in Australia, actually, and around the States, whenever I've gone to colleges or high schools or whatever and done workshops, what I'm seeing is a lot of people shedding by themselves. And that is not cool. You got to play with people. Practicing along with play-alongs or just shedding by yourself, you get used to not listening to somebody else. So for me, I practice all the time with other people. Of course, I do my own shedding, but we spend a lot of time, my friend Cameron Undy, the bass player here, we would practice scales together to work on tuning, and that would become tunes when we would mess around just improvising on a major scale or something. So young people I feel like there is like a lot of, and I'm definitely generalizing here, a lot of people sounding the same, especially on saxophones. Younger people, and I feel like it's possibly a product of what you're talking about, having an access to everything. And so I don't know, you mightn't get obsessed with one album like me and play it 50 times a day for 3 months,
Which album was that?
Oh, well, there were quite a few.
Okay.
Sometimes it was not me, but the roommate who played Blue Train every morning for 3 months. Like, there was one note in Curtis Fuller's trombone solo that I still can't. It's like that. But early Ornette stuff, Tales of Captain Black, which is another Ornette album. Actually, no, it's a co-led album with Jamaluddin Takuma, Ronald Shannon Jackson, Ornette, and is it Graham Mix on guitar? No, I'm sorry, James Bud Ulmer on guitar.
Oh,
yeah.
James Bud.
Yeah. but also 4 and more miles, you know. It's just whatever we had access to, but we would play them to death. Definitely a lot of Eric Dolphy, I have to say. Far Cry.
Mm.
Listen to that.
How about Cannonball Adderley?
Oh my God, yes. um, uh, yeah, mainly through Miles, but I mean, how can you touch, like, his rhythmic feel is just to die for.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I just love how free he is on the saxophone. It's just amazing, his time feel. Yeah.
Well, every musician, I suspect, especially in New York, has to wear a lot of musical hats to survive. I would think. I think you're the first person I've spoken with in this manner that did significant copying. Was
Oh,
a copyist,
yeah.
and I think it's an interesting endeavor. And I wondered if you started out with the special pens and the paper, and then at some point did you transition to Finale or Sibelius?
Yeah, that I've learned so much. I have hundreds of composers' music on my computer. I've learned so much from copying music, it's not funny. I did start doing it professionally. Well, let me back up. Me and Nikki took exams every year. There's a system in Australia, part of the classical music system, Australian Music Examinations Board. So you could take like classical piano, classical whatever exams, but you also every year we would take musicianship exams and a theory exam. They were separate. So in other words, like how to beautifully write music as a young kid, and they're graded levels. So both me and Nikki took that. So we both have very good music handwriting. And so those lessons have paid off for me big time because so in the mid 90s, I had a transcribing job of all of Book a Little stuff for a publisher, but he never ended up getting the rights for it. But that was really wonderful. I transcribed all that by ear from a cassette tape and wrote it all out by hand. I think it was 98 is when I started on computers, and that was doing big band charts for somebody. And I would go to their place. I didn't have a computer. I didn't know how to turn on a computer. I didn't know how to reboot a computer. I didn't know anything about a computer, but I could write you a big band chart. So that was on Cubase. And when I started, so in 2002, I bought the program Sibelius. I was playing with Diva Jazz Orchestra. I joined them in, when did I join Diva?
1998.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
And they used to have a guy who was in his 90s still copying, hand copying, and there were a ton of mistakes. So every rehearsal, we would spend a lot of time correcting mistakes. And I have very quick ears. It would drive me insane that of hearing the mistakes, and sometimes we'd have to keep going. I'm like, but second trombone has an F natural, you know. So I went up and said, hey, give me a shot. Let me, copy one of Tommy Newsom's big band charts here, and I guarantee we will not have to correct any notes in the rehearsal. That's how it started.
What did you get from Tommy Newsom? A handwritten score?
Handwritten big score, and I ended up doing a ton of stuff for Tommy. And I learned the ethics of copying from Tommy. He told me some great stories. After the very first one, I'm like, so Tommy, I don't know whether to ask you. Sometimes I know there's a missing flat, but I know it's all in unison. Do you want me to ask you about that, or what's the ethics here? What should I do here? And in answer, he said, when Duke Ellington was trying out a new copyist, he would put 2 mistakes in the chart and expect the copyist to correct them and not ask him about it. And Tommy said, I want, you're supposed to, you got to make me look good. I was like, got it. And if it was something I really wasn't sure about, of course I would ask him, but that was the way we operated. And I just learned so much especially how to arrange for a saxophone section, like 50s jazz arranging. So, man, I've really learned a lot from people like some of the arrangers from Freddie Cole, Tommy Newsom, then all the way through to, say, Butch Morris. And I've even done stuff for Donato Coleman, Ornette's son, like to run the full gamut of all sorts of stuff that a copying I've done.
Did you ever get, well, this would have maybe not been able to happen, a recording of the song in some form which would inform you about the arrangement and whether or not the arranger really I can't finish my question. I'm just wondering, if you heard a recording, perhaps a combo arrangement of something that then became a big band arrangement, might you have heard something in a combo that didn't seem to be jiving in the arrangement and then have to bring that up with the arranger?
Yes. A good copyist, and I feel like there's a lot less copyists around, and I feel like the art of copying, I'm really glad to have Tommy to show me the ropes about certain things, because a good copyist is also a proofreader. So you're not just writing everything out and then that's it. I think in the classical world that would be a different story, but in the jazz world you were expected to be a proofreader. So yeah, I did some stuff some Ellington stuff in New York City Ballet in 2018, and I was given some PDFs of. So it was like Michelle Dorrance, a tap dancer, was doing stuff with New York City Ballet, and it was so it was orchestra plus big band. It was amazing, actually. It was really amazing. So these set to choreograph to these Duke Ellington pieces. So I was in charge of part transcribing, part orchestrating. Well, actually transcribing and orchestrating, that sort of stuff from so I had to go sometimes to the recordings. I was given certain PDFs that have been published, and there's definitely a ton of mistakes. And so I want to be delicate about how I say this.
Well, sure. You must get almost like a sense of ownership with these things, even if you're not the original composer. You're so invested in it.
Oh, for sure. I mean, my name is at the bottom of everything I send out, and I'm very proud of the work I do. And I do have a website, but it's all been word of mouth. I seem to pretty much always have copying jobs on. I've got 3 on at the moment.
Is there a musician's union rate for this kind of work?
Yes. I did do, there is a contract. I don't even know the right terms. I've only worked under one union contract, although that New York City Ballet, I didn't realize till later. It should have been under the union contract. And that was for Colored Girls, an off-Broadway production at the Public Theater. So that was all billed under the union contract because it's a union hall. So yeah, that was a big deal. And I have to say, it was very complex figuring out. It's by line and by page and by this and by that. It's very actually convoluted. It's yeah.
You get less bread for whole rests.
Yeah, I don't even know. I had to get a lot of help from the union to figure out how to.
Yeah.
They had to walk me through how that stuff works, that
Okay.
world works. It was an interesting look into that world though, because the very few Broadway copying houses that are left, oh my God, they make an insane amount of money. It's actually one of the biggest expenses to getting a production up and running is the music, is getting all the music written down for people.
Oh, I
Yeah,
did not know that.
yeah.
So
I
speaking
didn't
of
either.
yeah, speaking of multiple hats, I know you've done some teaching uh, with young children,
Yep.
and I wonder if you've found a need to invent things along the way that perhaps you didn't learn in the music conservatory when teaching young kids.
Yeah. So I've never done as much teaching as I have over the last year through the pandemic, actually, because so I was teaching for two different schools, and both of these places have taught me a lot about teaching. One of them has just been like leading an 3 times a week just for an hour afternoon workshop sort of thing at a charter school in Brownsville, Brooklyn. So the poorest neighborhood in Brooklyn. The school is 98% Black, but the program, everybody starts an instrument in 7th grade. In 8th grade, everybody is in the band. It's fantastic. So it's like, brass and saxophones and rhythm section instruments. And I'm what they call a music enrichment teacher. So I help out with the beginners, and they do like 3 months of boot camp saxophone, and then in 8th grade they play it for a whole year. So that's what's been going on, and it's I've been doing that for about 6 years or something, and also private lessons for the last couple of years, maybe 3 years now, at the richest private school in Brooklyn, Poly Prep, which is again a middle school, but out in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. So it could not be more. It's a tale of two cities. The way what I teach at, very very interesting. They're just private lessons, but we put everything on Zoom for the kids in Brownsville. So at first I was doing video tutorials. So I've come out of the pandemic with 3 new skills that I did not have before. One of them being, I know music editing software now. I'm actually pretty good at Logic. I've put out some parody music videos, as well as some more, like I did a 6 altos overlay thing of one of my tunes. Actually, Gargoyle is up there. I did an all baritone version of Gargoyle. You could hear that. I'm playing Shaker in 5 on that. That's up on YouTube. You can, yes, that's where you should check it out. And that's
Right.
Yeah, that's all baritones. So I came out that, and I started on iMovie, and now using Final Cut Pro. I've gotten very good at music editing, video editing, and sourdough bread. I've given away bread. I've made stencils, like I did a bass on top of one for Nikki, and my friend Jamie plays guitar. I get a Les Paul guitar on top, and. But so at first, I ended up doing a lot of group things on Zoom with kids, as well as then the kids also were getting some private lessons over Zoom. And if I didn't have a ton of experience already teaching kids and being pretty good with being able to try to get kids up and playing pretty quickly, if I didn't already have that, and being able to troubleshoot things that go wrong with a saxophone, like a leaky pad and stuff like that, I've been very proud of, like, you know what, I think this key might be leaking. Can we try, seriously.
I've done that, yes.
Oh my God, I'm definitely patting myself on the back for you know, being able to troubleshoot stuff over Zoom. I do have a whisper room in our apartment in Brooklyn, which is a little soundproof, not quite soundproof, but booth, like you used to see in a studio. It's a vocal booth that I bought pre-pandemic because I had complaints from a neighbor in our apartment building.
Yeah.
And I got it 3 months before COVID hit. Then when COVID hit, you could not buy one of those. So my wife works for the New York City Health Department.
Mm-hmm.
So she was working from home. She was activated to work on emergency response stuff. So she was working from home. I was working in that booth teaching kids. That's how we survived.
Yeah.
That's how we've survived the last year. It was obviously very intense at our place sometimes.
Yeah. Now I can see why that duo gig for the 10 people in the audience felt so good.
Yes, exactly. I've been playing in a booth for so long, and I have to say, it's really good sound in there. I've actually dug it. I've always wanted one, to be honest, because it's great. You go in there, you shut the door, and you practice.
Mm-hmm.
It's like going to an office.
Wow.
Instead of, so I do like it, and it is actually a good sound in there. And I like that I'm not disturbing a ton of people. I can just go in there and just do what I want to do. So, yeah.
Well, we've been at this for a very enjoyable hour or so. I want to close with a non-musical question that I'm curious about. I wonder what people from other countries think about the United States on occasion. And because you've experienced two different countries, do you have anything that you could share with me about how the United States, how America has felt in the last number of years compared to how it felt when you first arrived?
As I mentioned before, I am a dual citizen. So I'm an Aussie New Yorker, or a Yankaroo. That's another word we use. I feel like it's so different. I felt like, compared to when I first came, and I feel like this is a lot of people who come from outside of the US, especially as musicians, they come to New York and they're living in New York and New York bubble. They just want to be, in New York. And the longer you stay here, you have to deal with the fact that New York is in the United States. And all that comes with that. I actually have been to and performed in all 50 states. So I've done a lot of touring and obviously seen a lot of the country. And because my accent has not gone anywhere at all, I don't have to go very far before I'm not being understood still, and stuff like that. But in terms of then to now, and especially through the Trump years, I had a lot of Australian friends reaching out to me. Are you guys okay? What the, going forward, I'm scared for the arts. I'm really scared for the arts. I feel we've already lost venues just locally, and it's going to be a slow recovery, I think, especially for improvised music and smaller venues. That is, the future does scare me, because these are all, I'm talking about all the independent venues that, if they've managed to survive, it's just going to be hard. There's going to be less places to play. Yeah.
Okay. You have to keep inventing hats.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm very glad we did it, and I I didn't really ask you too much about the years you spent with the Diva Jazz Orchestra, which we had the group at Hamilton College a number of years ago, and
What year
man,
was, do you remember what year that was?
it was probably 4 years ago.
Ah, so I'd already left. Yeah,
I
I left in 2015.
Yeah, but speaking about reaching out to an audience, it was so inclusive, and there was a whole crowd of junior high kids there, and they came up on the stage afterwards, and like I was just watching this whole thing. I said, this is exactly what we need.
Yes. There's another group I play with too, that Ellen Rowe at University of Michigan started in 2017, mainly because she's been teaching there for 20 years and there's still not enough um, young women going into improvised music at college and at the high school level as well. So she formed together a group to do outreach, and we've had to put plans on hold, but we are going to be doing some stuff in January. Great group. We did a recording in 2017. So Ellen, Marion from Detroit. Oh my God, I'm having a mental blank. Bass player from Detroit. Oh my gosh. Oh, that's terrible. Alison Miller on drums, the front line, Ingrid Jensen, me, Virginia Mayhew, Tia Fuller, and Melissa on trombone. Sorry. I haven't seen these people for a while. I'm forgetting everyone's last names.
And you're 14 hours away. It's okay.
So, and I did experience that with Diva. Just like they need to see women up on stage. Young men and women need to see mixed bands, all women bands. They need to see bands like this. That's what's going to create a really a much more inclusive scene, and music teaches people how to, be good citizens, a good people in life. That's what I believe as well. And I'm very proud of the outreach stuff that we did with Diva and also with this other group. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking these questions. You obviously did a lot of research, which is very flattering, but thank you very much. I really enjoyed this.
I wish you the best with your gigs down under. I was gonna I'm so happy that I didn't do this. I was gonna open up like singing "The Land Down Under" from Men at Work. I said, no, that's too corny. Don't do that.
You are going to have to go onto YouTube, though. I did do a Men at Work, Who Can It Be, Meow, COVID music video. I'm not kidding you.
I have to see that.
And Colin Hay, the lead singer, did a cameo in it. That's a whole nother story for another time.
Awesome. Well, how many days do you have left before they let you out?
This is my 8th day, so okay. I've got another 6 days. Yeah.
You're past the halfway point, I guess.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Well, I hope we cross paths in the future in Brooklyn rather than in,
Yes, I agree. That would be great.
Okay. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks.